This, as Joseph mentioned, this is a question that was sent into the Ask John Mackay site, so you can go and read it, but I'll just go through it. And it was, does the Bible say that the earth is flat? Are the pictures showing a round earth from space real? Now, of course, we live in an age where you have digital composites and computer simulations, and a lot of the modern day pictures that you can get off the NASA website showing the Earth are digital composites. But we need to go back into a little bit of history, and some of us are actually old enough to remember when this photo was published. And back in the late 1960s and early 70s, I can speak from personal experience. It was an exciting time to be growing up, actually. And I remember seeing this photo being published on the front page of the newspaper where I lived, and it was probably published on the front page of every newspaper all over the world. And it's probably the most reproduced photo in all of the world, because it was originally published at the end of 1972. And it was taken by the NASA astronauts this was the last expedition to the moon in 1972. And you can actually, there is a transcript of the sort of chatter that goes on between the early astronauts and the NASA base in Houston. It's quite interesting to read sometimes. But anyway, this was a comment made by Eugene Cernan. I know we're not the first to discover this, but we'd like to confirm from the crew of Apollo 17 that the world is round. Now, I'm very pleased that he said that we are not the first to discover this, because in fact, as Glenn has just reminded us, the Bible actually says that the earth is round, and there's that word that Glenn was referring to, the circle of the earth. So in the prophet Isaiah, right, we're talking about a few thousand years before Eugene Cernan, right? He sits above the circle of the earth. And that's where that particular Hebrew word, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, shog or what, is there, meaning roundness. So Eugene Cernan was right. They weren't the first to discover it, but they did get a good look at it. And they took one photo on a film camera. And we have to remember that back in 1972, people took photos on film cameras, and to be able to get a photo like that by the sort of photo processing you could do would be extremely difficult. Nothing like what we can do with digital photos these days. Now, if you read the rest of that transcript, the next comment is quite interesting as well. Eugene Cernan went on to say, and there's no strings holding it up either. It's out there all by itself. Well, an even older commentary from the Bible says the same thing there. He suspends the earth over nothing. In the book of Job, which is possibly the oldest book in the Bible, and certainly written in several thousand years ago. So yes, our modern experience actually confirms what the Bible has been saying, has been telling us for thousands of years. Now, this is another famous photo. It's usually reproduced with at a 90-degree angle here, with the surface of the moon on the bottom and the Earth coming up after that. And it's often referred to as the Earthrise photo. It was taken by Bill Anders. So this is even earlier, in December 1968. That's where we also got that famous recording of the astronauts reading from Genesis 1 as they went round the back of the moon and then emerged from the other side. And as you can see, it was 24th of December, so it was Christmas Eve. And it was interesting, of all of the things that they could have said when they went round the back of the moon and emerged for the first time in history, that they chose to read, "In the beginning God created," and read about half of Genesis 1 there. But anyway, this photo was taken, and this is how they took it. It's usually reproduced at 90-degree angle and called Earthrise, which is a nice idea. But the other interesting thing is, notice the curve on the right-hand side there, that shadow. Now, again, Glenn referred to that. This is what's called the Terminator, right, where you go from light to dark, and it's quite a sudden, abrupt change. Now, the only way you can get that is if you have light shining on a solid sphere, not onto a flat disk. And so this is a modern one, but it shows it very, very clearly, that curved Earth. And again, the Book of Job, one of the oldest writings that we have that's included in the scripture, he inscribed a circle on and there's that same word meaning roundness, on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. And there's also a similar passage in Proverbs. And the only way you can get that, and you can do this as an experiment yourself with just get a fairly large ball and shine a light on it and see that you can get that edge. And this is the important thing with the science. You don't need to do any clever, fancy physics. We can experience the roundness of the Earth with some simple experiments that we can do here on the ground, or close to the ground. And that's one of the things we like to do at Creation Research, is show you that you can go out and do your own science, whether it's digging up fossils or observing rock layers or looking at living things. It doesn't require a lot of fancy equipment or a lot of clever physics and theoretical knowledge. So let's just briefly have a look at an idea that the ancient people believed that the world was flat, because we have this assumption that the ancient people were somehow stupid or ignorant, and they believed all sorts of things. In fact, the ancient people were extremely clever. And this is a famous Greek, Eratosthenes, and he did an experiment to work out the size of the Earth. Now, notice it was already assumed that the Earth was round. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered doing this experiment. His purpose in doing this experiment was to actually measure the circumference of the Earth. Now, you wouldn't do that if you didn't think that the Earth was already round. And so he did this experiment, and you can notice that's a couple of hundred years in the 3rd century BC. And what he did was to look at the shadows of a pole and at different places, sort of north and south from one another in Egypt, and look at the differences in the lengths of the shadows. Now, we won't go into all of the maths of this. It's a bit too early in the morning for maths for me, and it's probably a bit too late at night for maths over in the UK. But the point is that there are differences in the lengths of the shadows, and that can be explained by the fact that the Earth is round. Now, this is a simple experiment, and you can do it yourself these days. You can look up how to do it, and you can do exactly that sort of experiment. But later on, Joseph has a simple demonstration of how you can do this. So you can do the science in looking at the shape of the Earth on the ground by yourself, just using simple maths and simple equipment. But we do experience roundness in other ways. Now, particularly now that we go flying all around the world. Now, if you were to fly from Europe to the east coast of the United States, or the other way round, from the east coast of the United States over to Europe, you go up the east coast of Canada, just skirt the tip of Greenland and Iceland, and then come over to Europe. Now, if the Earth was flat, that would be a curve. And in fact, it looks like a rather indirect route. You think, well, these days people want to save fuel and they want to save time. You know, flying an aeroplane across the Atlantic Ocean, surely there is a more direct route to go. Well, in fact, that is the most direct route. It's what's called a great circle route. And it becomes a straight line if you connect it on a spherical Earth. So on the right here, we have the connection between the east coast of the US and northern Europe there. And on a spherical Earth, yes, that is a straight line. That is the shortest route. And the people who actually calculate how much fuel and how much time is involved in making that trip are going to go for the shortest route they can, and the most convenient and the least costly route they can. And yes, that's it. And these are called great circle routes, and it's really good. And ships use it as well. It works well flying over the ocean. Of course, it's you can't always do it if your route is going to take you over a lot of land, because then you're overflying other people's countries, and there are various political and other reasons for not taking a great circle route. So that's something that people experience today. In the Second World War, when radar was first invented and used as a way of detecting planes coming in, there was, if you flew very low, you could actually escape detection until you got quite close to your target. Now, these days, of course, we have other technologies for tracking planes all over the world. However, so you can't really do that these days with the sort of military aircraft. But it did lead to an interesting saying that has come into the language, and that is flying under the radar. And that's literally where it came from in the early days of military flying and of radar detection. And so that term, flying under the radar, that's where it came from the fact that the Earth is round. And you could, if we just go back, you could actually fly under the radar for a certain, until you got quite close to your original target. Now, low flying also has its other sorts of hazards, but it's become a term in common parlance in English. And I have a friend who did long haul flying for many. He's now retired, but he flew long haul routes all over the world. And he described a similar situation. This isn't to do with radar, but of course, planes do still communicate by just ordinary radio transmission, and they communicate with the ground stations. And he said it was very interesting. There were in some places where he could communicate with other aircraft that were further away from a ground station that he was unable to contact. And so you can imagine here we've got two aircraft, and the aircraft on the left there cannot communicate with the ground station, but it can communicate with a plane that is even further away. And that is simply because the radio waves, of course, travel in straight lines. So the plane above the Earth is above the curve, but the ground station is below the curve. And until they fly, the first aircraft flies over the curve, it can't communicate with the ground station. And so that's a phenomenon that pilots can observe these days. So there are lots of simple things of everyday experience and simple experiments that we can do, where we experience the roundness of the earth without having to know any clever theoretical physics or any clever scientific experiments that involve a lot of technology. And so Joseph will show us a simple way of doing that experiment that they did back in Egypt thousands of years ago. And as Glenn said, the Bible has a lot to say about the earth. One of my favorite verses actually is that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Or I like the version that says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So everything on earth belongs to the Lord, and therefore that's where we should look for knowledge and wisdom about anything, even if it is about the shape of the earth.